This week on Playing Out of Control, we're going to look at the difference between having access to a game and having a game. Sega recently told Famitsu that it values the culture of physical media, but a digital shift is crucial as more people play on PC. Also today, the Video Game History Foundation opened a free E3 digital archive. Thousands of pages of material, a dozen hours of video from the first E3s. That's a work that really keeps old games reachable. And then there's the topic of tonight's episode, the Game Boy. And this is episode 7. Take it with you. The Game Boy didn't ask where the living room television was. It didn't care about your setup, your input lag, your component cables. You know what? It came with you. Rode in the back seat with you on those trips with your family. Went in the bag when you went to the pool. It sat on the porch with you when you were out there, just chilling. It went camping with you, like in my case. Wherever summer was happening, the Game Boy was there. The only real question was whether you could see the screen once you got out there because, gosh, it was horrible in sunlight. But we'll get to that because tonight we're going to talk about 10 Game Boy games that owned the summer. But first, let's talk about that word access, which means about 6 different things if you look at the news today. Anyway, I'm Adam Richardson. This may call me Maniac, Arcus Maximus, or Fire Breathing Buddy. And this is Playing Out of Control, the podcast from Playing Out of Control Gaming, POCG.net. We've been reviewing games since 1998. No bought scores, no filters, just opinions. We tell you how we feel about a game, not what the game companies tell us to feel. This closes our summer run of Nintendo. After the Super Nintendo and the N64, the Game Boy version has a different rule. These aren't games that look like summer. These are the games that went with you on summer. The cartridge that was actually in the bag, because back then it had to be on a cartridge and you could only take so many with you. But before we get to that, here's the news. We talked earlier, and we talked multiple times now about how Sony's stopping manufacture of PS5 discs in January 2028 and how pretty much everybody's mad about this, even people that don't like discs. Sega said that they have a culture of physical media and that the company still tends to think in a physical perspective. He called digital a crucial shift for gaming, and so they're kind of picking both sides. The problem with that is you can kind of test it by what you find in a box. Take for instance Sonic Racing Cross Worlds for the Switch 2. It comes fully on the cartridge. Open the box, the game's in there, no internet, drop it in the Switch and you're playing. No download or anything required, except if you want to get some patches. But it runs without them. Sonic Frontiers Definitive Edition for the Switch, though, it's a game key card. That's a little piece of cardboard. It's got a little chip on it, and it's kind of a license. And it gives you access to it, and you can trade it and sell it. So it's kind of like a half measure. It's kind of like a little code in a box, but slightly different. You can sell it and stuff, but and the thing to remember is, even if there's a disc in a box these days, what does that matter is if you got to put it in there and you can't play it without downloading 200 gigs or, the game doesn't run because you don't have a patch. So saying you're shipping a box and you believe in physical doesn't really mean what we want it to mean. What matters is whether the thing that you bought contains the thing you need, right? If it's not on the disc and they send you a disc, what's it matter? One of the other creators, Disgia, they said that they think that if Sony wants to abandon physical copies of games, they ought to just get rid of the PlayStation as a whole, because why not just have some kind of little device that just plugs into a TV and everything streams? And, I kind of agree with them there. I mean, what's the point of a console is if everything's digital and it's relying on the servers. So other people are caring about that, and that's kind of what matters. Really kind of cool feature this week in the news was Video Game History Foundation launched multiple free E3 collections this week. So these are the paper trail, the photos, press kits, all the stuff that you would pick up or see at E3 back in the day. This one really takes me back because the first few E3s, I really remember that actually more than the first few. I mean, in the mid-90s, that's where game journalism was. It was beginning. The online stuff was at E3. Everybody was rushing to get stuff posted as soon as the press releases hit. And then there was the couple that were real close to me in Atlanta. And I think when we lost E3, things really began to change. Caroline Ronch was the senior vice president of IDSA, the trade organization that founded and ran E3. And her collection is mostly what we see in here, more than 1,000 pages from 96 to 2011, flyers, guest passes, photographs, industry reports, binders, that somebody kept and held on to. And Anthony Parsi donated the rights to nearly 12 hours of video from the very first 4 E3s, redigitized tapes, the Sega Saturn surprise launch, which was a great one, Sony walking on the stage and saying $299 and, stunning the room. The first public demos of Super Mario 64 in full 3D. These aren't highlight reels. They're the raw tapes, what the floor looked like and what it sounded like. It's really great. Really took me back because, that was where I kind of grew up there in that period. I started this site during those first E3 years. And so it's really cool. There's lots of stuff on there, directories, show dailies, all these things that you can look at. And I really encourage you to go check it out because there's a lot of really cool stuff there. And, it's kind of a freeze frame of what the industry promised it would be. And so really kudos goes out to the Video Game History Foundation. They really did some awesome stuff there. Sometimes preservation isn't just replacing an old object. It's helping keep that old object available for other people to see in the future. And another news story is a developer called Anime OT4KU added physical disk support for the Mr. FPGA project. So you can hook up an external USB optical drive now and boot original disks on the PlayStation Core, the Sega CD Core, TurboGrafx 16 PC Engine CD Core, Saturn Core, and even the CI Core. And they're testing some other ones right now. Drive quality and disk condition obviously matter. Slimline drives that pull power off the same USB cable, they tend to have a little bit of issue, and so you should have your own power supply for those. Retro RGB tested up some old drives and, original PlayStation disc, but they did work, but with some stutters. So probably want to make sure you have some new or better equipment. But, that it's really hard to find things like a Sega CD add-on these days, and certain real equipment is getting really expensive. And so here we have an option that you can hook it up to your Mister and still use original discs and things like that. And so it's another way to save access, so that's really great. Some quick news, the Midway Wolf Unit FPGA core dropped this week. Developer Blame BLAHM1D released a Mr. Core for Midway's Wolf Unit arcade board. So Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, NBA Hang Time are now playable, and Mortal Kombat 3, WWF WrestleMania, Rampage World Tour, they're all expected to come out soon. I can't really wait for the WWF WrestleMania one because that was my jam. And these boards were really considered hard to replicate, but hey, somebody did it. So it's another win for the arcade department because they're really hitting it off this week. And 2 new optical drive emulators for Fujitsu's FM Towns hit the Japanese market. Now, if you don't know, the FM Towns was the first home computer to ship with a CD-ROM drive as standard. So most of the library boots from the CD, and those drives are really not easy to replicate or fix. And so now you can, back up your ISOs and connect them with this ODEs. And so that's really great. So these niche systems really need some help to kind of stay alive. And Dragon Slayer, that was a 1984 PC 8801 action RPG. So now came into the Switch. You can get it digitally for $6.49. It's got mazes and dungeons. It's a very early RPG. You really have to know what you're getting into. It's not one of those easy ones to play, but no emulation setup required. You can play it right on your Switch. And then Sega Rally. It's always Sega Rally these days. Sega Rally Championship Arcade is now available on PC, Xbox 360, and Xbox Series X. This is got custom aspect ratios, toggles for CRT, wheel support, all that stuff. You just have to supply your own legally required ROM and soundtrack, and you can play it on there. It's really pretty cool what some of these guys have really done for arcade systems right now and bringing support to them to other systems now. And Xbox is testing ad-supported cloud streaming for insiders. No extra cost. You can play what you want that your games that you have on the Xbox stuff, and sessions are 1 hour. So it's access, but it's not access that you don't own your console anymore. And the games are in the digital library, so it lets you get to them if you have that. But a stream's not ownership. It's kind of goofy that they're ad playing this. I don't really care for it, but if it helps you, more power to you guys. And, Xbox has been down all day today, so yeah, how's that work? Anyway, Ambernick showed off the RGSP this week. It's a gorgeous little clamshell handheld. It's going to have pixel perfect 3x GBA scaling. We're waiting, for some review hardware to show up on it. We've been playing right now recently. The RG35XX has been with me for the last 2 weeks. I love this thing, and it's like $30, and it goes everywhere with me, and it's in my backpack all the time when I'm doing service work, and if I'm stuck somewhere with time to kill, I pull it out and play. I've been playing through Phantasy Star right now, completing the whole game, so I've dropped off ladders, and it doesn't care, so the new one, I can't wait for it. It's going to be a little bit better, thinner, it's going to be great, and it's a little bit better screen, and so that's kind of the whole idea, right? It's something you could take with you, and it kind of throws us back into what we're talking about today, the Game Boy, because, that was the same thing. That's what the Game Boy was built for. Anyway, ad break. This episode is brought to you by us, POCG.net. The point of this show isn't just to remember old games, it's to keep a record of them. Reviews that don't bend to marketing pressure, restored news from the original 1998 archive, the vault where all our scores live, the lab where our hardware gets taken apart, the archive we're putting back together to the zip disks, and the new guide section we're working on. It's what we do. And if you like a site that treats old games as things worth playing and worth keeping, visit us at POCG.net. Remember, no bought scores, no filters, just opinions. And speaking of keeping a record, let's pull something from the week POCG first put it on the page. This week in history, POCG history takes us back to the last week of July, 1998 and 1999. And I'll be honest about what's in there because it's not what you'd expect from a Game Boy episode. Everything published that week was PC, every single bit of it. Let's start with the reviews. July 30th, 1999, we reviewed the Elsa 3D Revelator and gave it a 3.5 out of 5. That's a pair of shutter glasses for your PC, stereoscopic 3D. 1999, you strapped it on your face in front of a CRT and it wanted it to work, and it sort of kind of did. It's one of those weird things that really was kind of interesting back then, and, hard for somebody to wear glasses. So, same day, we also reviewed the Elsa Eraser 3. That one got a 4.0. That's a video card, and it's basically the complement to those glasses. You had to have the video card and the glasses together. For the most part, you could make it work other ways, but they sold them as a set normally. They sent them to us as a review set. Then the news from the same week, and this is the part I love. The last week of July 1998 was Sin Week, a ritual shooter. The demo dropped on the 26th, and we called it Sin Day. Then it was the Sin demo mirrors, GameSpy adding Sin support, README updated, chat logs, preview of the game. One game ate our entire front page for an entire week. But buried in that same week was 1998, July 29th, Microsoft to publish gas-powered games. Now, that's Chris Taylor's new studio back then. Nobody knew what that was going to become, and that's kind of the whole point of keeping the week instead of the winter, just a winter, right? At the time, Sin was the story, but gas-powered games was just a, small little blog thing. And that's, when you look back, that's the thing no one can, manufacture later. What news really seemed important, what news really mattered. You really don't know till later. Anyway, that's enough for playing out of control gaming history. The Game Boy arrived in the United States on July 31st. I was 6 years old. I'll be honest with you, I didn't get one right away. It was a number of years before I actually got one. But when I got one, it went with me everywhere. The Super Nintendo and the 64 games of the summer list we did, the 64 was about having your friends over and the 4 players, and the Super Nintendo was about the beach and the sand and the games that, felt like summer. And, the difference is the Game Boy is different. The Game Boy is the system that you took with you, right? I mean, it went everywhere with you. So the rule for this list isn't the release date. It isn't sunny graphics, because the Game Boy doesn't have sunny graphics. Everything's a shade of olive and gray, right? I mean, it's, monoscale or chroma scale. Grayscale? Yeah, that's the right word, right? But the Game Boy is the game that went with you everywhere, right? You took the Game Boy in the backseat of the car when you were on trips. You took it to the pool. You took it to the porch when you wanted to sit out there with your grandparents, or with a link cable and a friend. For me, I did a lot of camping with my stepdad. I took it with me when we went camping. So what games came with you? what games did you make room for in the bag when you needed extra room in that bag for all the other stuff you had, right? And lots of batteries. So that's kind of what this list is. Like, what are the games that you always took with you during the summer or the time when you had the... So which games came with you when you were off doing whatever you were doing with your Game Boy? What games did you take on the road, on the trips with you? Well, that's what we're going to look at this list. These are the top Nintendo games for the Game Boy that you took on the summer trips. Number one was a game everybody played. It's a game that came out with the Game Boy. I mean, grandparents, stepdad. My stepdad played it. I mean, when we went camping, he took it all. We would compete over it, and that's the pack-in Tetris. Every Game Boy sold in the United States came with Tetris in a box. It wasn't just a game people selected. It was the one you already had. Every kid who got a Game Boy got Tetris, whether they asked for it or not. And a lot of parents bought the system because Tetris came with it. A lot of adults loved that game. They loved the system for Tetris. It's the first time a lot of adults really got into gaming. And, you know, putting that game in the box turned out to be the smartest decision Nintendo ever made, because Tetris is the ideal travel game, the perfect road game, the perfect waiting room game, the perfect I've only got 5 to 10 minutes to play game. There's no plot thread to lose when you put it down, no save system to manage, no password to write down, no map to remember. Blocks fall, you flip them around, you turn them down, you make lines, and you clear the level. I mean, it's just that simple. But it's simple enough that you screw it up, and brutal enough that half paying attention, you lose the game. So for me, my fondest memories of Tetris is playing it with my stepdad, Wayne. Trying to beat each other's high scores, him getting mad and muttering things that you couldn't understand. You know, you put it down, you know, when we pull up to go to get gas or a restaurant or something like that, you know, when you put it down for that amount of time, but then I'd pick it back up when we got back in the car or the van in my case. And, you know, it was a great thing to do. And it was a great way to connect with, you know, my stepdad. It's really the Game Boy, you know, that was the defining game for that system, not just because it came with it, but because it connected to everybody. You know, parents had no interest in games like Mario and stuff like that, but Tetris, they had an interest in. So anyway, number 2, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Right? It's a vacation game. You know, you wake up on an island, the ship gets in a storm, and you know, you got a beach and forest and mountains and a swamp and a dreamy village where everybody's got this secret, and, you know, you're trying to slowly work out this mystery. But the thing is, you can't stay there. It's just it's a temporary vacation, you know. It's a whole place where you're just passing through. And, you know, basically the game tells you that, you know, in the first opening scene, you're on an island and you got to leave, but the island doesn't want you to go. And anyway, it was... Link's Awakening was like the first Zelda game. You know, you could sit outside under a tree at your grandparents' house and play, you know, feeling that warm air, and then, you know, trying to tilt the screen back and forth so the sun glare doesn't get in the way, because, you know, we all know how the sun glare was on that Game Boy. You know, I remember playing the original Zelda with my dad, and, you know, you're stuck inside. But Link's Awakening for the Game Boy, you know, I played it at the pool at my grandparents' house. You know, I played it anytime I went to my grandparents' house. I didn't have game systems there at the time, but I had my Game Boy, you know, so I played that. And, you know, that was always great to do. Something different about playing a game when you're outside, you know. You know, you can feel the air and the heat and hear the trees moving. You know, it's kind of a contradiction at the heart of it, right? An island you can't leave, played on a machine that's built to go anywhere. But, you know, that's when, though, you know, at one point, the Game Boy stopped being a private escape, and it became a social machine. And it really changed everything. And that's number 3 on our list. Pokemon Red and Blue. Pokemon changed the Game Boy. Not just because it was enormous, right? It was so popular. Because the link cable was part of the game. It wasn't an accessory. It wasn't optional extra. The design of the game required it. You could not complete the Pokedex without trading with another person, and that was intentional. You caught them alone, you know, tall grass, caves, the dark, safari zone where they always ran away. That's the solitary half of that game. But that's just you hanging out and playing the game whenever you wanted to, but you couldn't finish that game by yourself. You couldn't evolve a hunter into a ginger without trading it, to somebody else and then trading it back to you. You couldn't fill those last entries without finding someone who had the other version. It was one of the first games that made you go find somebody else. It really created what we would call multiplayer in a way that not like when you're playing together, but you're like separate put together. You know what I mean? And, it landed at the United States at the end of September 98. It was like the first real Pokemon summer, though, was 99. I remember I was like 16 and I didn't even play the Game Boy anymore at that point. But, that Pokemon game, it brought it back. I started playing the game again, the system again, and everybody was like just crazy about Pokemon, man. And I think I was actually on the mini Game Boy at that time, but that was like you really connected people. It was something special, and that's kind of why the Game Boy just kept selling. Years and years later, even into the Game Boy Color era, right? That's it's just kind of one of those special games. Oh man, Pokemon was great when it first came out. It's not as good these days, in my opinion, but back then it was the bomb. Now, let's skip down to the other end of the list, number 10. Metroid II, Return of Samus. All right, I know people are like, what? Why? I know it's like the game that you play. It's the counterweight to the Pokemon and the cartridge Tetris, right? It's a lonely game. It takes place on SR-388, a dead planet where your only job is to hunt down and kill every Metroid. The screen's small. It's got the muted gray, olive, and gray screen. The music is really ambient and really kind of sparse. Kind of sounds like you're underground. And I remember playing that game, and a lot of times you'd be playing it, in the bed when you're supposed to be sleeping, using a flashlight so you could see the screen because the lights were out. And or like me, I had the light add-on for the Game Boy. And, it's just that game that you played when everybody else was doing something else and was going to bed, but you were just too wired to sleep. You needed something else to do. And, it doesn't get the attention of like Super Metroid because, Super Metroid's a masterpiece in its own right, but everyone agrees. But Metroid 2 is the portable version of Isolation to me, and it's the one you play when the rest of the world was quiet. And that's why it's on this list. A summer game doesn't have to be about the season summer. In this case, it's about the game you remember thinking about the most that you played during that season. That game that you didn't have to be in the main room of the house and you didn't have to, be trying to hide playing a game. You just played it in your room under the covers, when everybody thought they was asleep. Anyway, the rest of the games are in the top little article on the site with the full write-up on every slot, but quickly I'll hit the highlights of the rest of them. You got Super Mario Land. It's like the strange launch game companion. It was a Mario game that doesn't feel like a Mario game, really. It was set in a place called Sarasa Land, and Mario had never been to. Pyramids, Easter Island Heads, a stage where he flies a plane, another where he, pilots a submarine. It was kind of weird, but it was something special in a way. Now, Wario Land, the lazy treasure hunt game, slow, lots of secrets to be found because you pressed the wrong button and the game rewarded you for it. And then Kirby's Dream Land, that was like that game that you just give to somebody that never played a game, and it was easy for them to play, it was friendly, and it was a short game, probably wasn't worth the money, but you could play it in an afternoon. It was a fun little game. Reminds me a lot of hanging out at the pool. Super Mario Land 2, bigger than the first one, more levels, got that weird space area. And the first time we saw Wario was a villain, right? So makes the list. Donkey Kong. That one was kind of interesting, right? It looks like it's going to be a straight port of the arcade game. But then you got the 4 screens and the barrel throwing the 8. The barrel throwing 8, and then it keeps going and 97 more levels after that. And the Game Boy deserved better than a straight port, and it got better than a straight port. And then Final Fantasy Adventure. That's the long haul game, right? The game you took on those long trips. Action RPG on a green screen with no backlight. Sitting there in the back of the van, trying to fiddle with it and keep the sun out of it. And it was back when you got a full game on a cartridge, right? Oh, good times. Anyway, I've reviewed a handful of handhelds now, and, There's a lot of great ones, a lot of bad ones. The Ambernick with the square 1-to-1 screen that we reviewed recently is a genuinely great Game Boy machine. It's got a different layout and it feels a little bit different in the hand, but it plays these Game Boy games perfectly. If you're looking for something that could play Game Boy games you can take on the road with you. You know, the thing about these systems is now you can have a handheld and you can have, thousands of games on there, right? I can have like 10,000 ROMs on a game or ROMs on a system. But back then, you just had one or two games with you. You had a horrible screen that you couldn't see in the summer, and ghosting that made the action games nearly unplayable. Contrast wheel that you couldn't ever get it to really show what you wanted to show. It was always fiddling back and forth, But we played it anyway, right? We had fun, because all we had before this was those Tiger handhelds. And this is when we first had real games that could go with us, real games. I mean, games with stories and quests and beginnings and endings. It was great. So what game did you take with you on your Game Boy road trips? Not your favorite Game Boy and, the abstract, the favorite game that you've had for it, but what was your favorite one that you just always wanted to take on the trips with you? Let me know. Drop your answer in the comments on the YouTube video or on the forum. Blue Sky, Mastodon, Reddit. We're all on all of them. Instagram, Facebook. It's all on the website, so hit us up, let us know. And if you like these podcasts, let me know.